Thank you very much, Jim. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining us for our monthly Global Chamber Export Import Forum. I am the moderator, Anita Rodal, president of SBPI Services. SBPI Services helps importers, global companies, and real estate investors save money and time and mitigate the risk on their cross-border payments. We also broker business and equipment loans and offer pronunciation coaching for business professionals wanting to speak a more accent-neutral American English if they're not born here. Now, for anyone who is not already familiar with the Global Chamber, it is a growing collaborative community of CEOs, executives, and business leaders in over 525 metro regions around the world. Its mission is to foster growth in cross-border business in every region of the world. Our forum today will take about 55 minutes, and the last 10 minutes, I'll open it up to questions and answers, and conversation. But until then, please keep yourselves on mute. I invite you to put your contact information in the chat, and please include your full name so people can find you. Also include the link to your LinkedIn, and don't forget to save the chat. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to put mine in there right now before I forget. So
I'm doing the same thing, Anita.
I'm sorry.
I'm going to do the same thing from the chat now before I forget. Oh. So there you go.
Perfect. Okay, great. Okay, and then everybody who's not Jade Wolanin, please mute yourselves. And we are very, very lucky to have Jade Wolanin here with us as my interviewee. And I will tell you a little bit about Jade. Jade Wolanin is the executive director of Trade Data Monitor, hereafter referred to as TDM for short. In the course of her work, she supports corporations, government agencies, trade associations, and other TDM clients in the North American and Asian regions. Her responsibilities include maintaining and creating client relationships, building and managing marketing campaigns, and assisting with the analysis of international trade data. Jade has trained more than 90 overseas officials in the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the State Department in the use of TDM statistics, thus helping them improve management of U.S. trade policy, which is very important to all of us. Jade possesses an advanced understanding of Google Analytics and is certified as an expert in international merchandise trade statistics by the World Trade Organization and the UN. She is an active participant in the Washington, D.C. international trade community, the Washington International Trade Association, and the Global Chamber. Jade is also the co-chair of the Agriculture, Energy, and Environment Program section of the DC chapter of Women in International Trade, otherwise known as WIT. She has a bachelor's degree in international business with a concentration in marketing and a minor in business Spanish. Welcome, Jade.
Thank you. It's nice to see everybody.
So nice to have you here. I always start off with 3 icebreaker questions. I ask these of all of my interviewees, and they're just real quick 30-second, 60-second responses, just so we get to know a little bit about you. So the first one is, what got you into your field?
Yeah, I mean, this one will be, again, all these will be pretty quick and easy, actually. So I just studied international business in college, and I ended up finding an internship in international trade specifically, and then fell down the data rabbit hole. So yeah, now I'm here today.
Okay, great. Those rabbit holes, you have to watch out for them. What do you like the most about what you do?
Honestly, it's not something you think of when you think of trade data, but I've always enjoyed helping people. I think it makes me feel good. So anytime I teach a client about more knowledge about data, specifically trade data, and come up with a workaround for their issue, anything like that, people are always just super appreciative. So really, I like helping people understand trade data.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Flip side of that question is, what do you like the least about what you do?
Yeah, I had to think about this for a little bit, but I think what I like least about it is that there are so many unanswered questions about trade, and it's even sometimes hard to find an answer, and sometimes nobody seems to know the answer. And I go to like 5 different contacts, and that can be a little difficult, again, falling down a different kind of rabbit hole. So
Yeah, no, I get that. That can be frustrating. Okay, so
yeah.
let's get into more specifics now. Um, what import-export trade does Trade Data Monitor provide? Like what's the global overview of that?
Yeah, so at Trade Data Monitor, we provide a database and a web portal that displays import and export trade statistics of every single physical good by HS code for 135 monthly countries we're at now. And so that ends up covering 99% of global trade flows. And then the data points specifically are in terms of values, quantities, and average unit price. And then sometimes we have more information available, like re-export, port, transport mode, things like that. And so all the data is based on customs separation.
Okay, great. Now, what types of clients do you typically work with, and how do they tend to utilize your data?
Yeah, so I work with a wide range of clients, anyone that cares about trade, which seems to be a lot of people nowadays. But really, our clients range from, corporations to, some of the government agencies you mentioned, to trade associations looking to get some more market access, and even, law firms that are looking into like anti-dumping and countervailing duty. So, and then in terms of like the person themselves, it's typically someone that's supply chain analyst, market intelligence, trade economists, of course. So in a general sense, clients will use the data to analyze supply chain flows, identify new export markets, mitigate risk, use the data just in general as a variable in their forecasting models, especially some of the hedge funds that use our data. And the most obvious one is analyze global trade policy, like tariffs and sanctions and how that might change flows. And then what I think is interesting is whenever you see world events like COVID-19 or something that may shift the trade movements and see those different trade flows.
Is it just companies in the US looking for a global perspective, or is it companies outside the US? Like, in other words, do they have to be based in any particular region? I know you specialize in North America and Asia, but is that for US companies looking towards those regions, or is it for anybody looking for information in those regions?
Yeah, I mean, it's really anybody. I just work with our US-based companies, but then honestly, a lot of them end up being, huge global companies at the same time too.
Makes sense. So inquiring mind wants to know where you source your data from and how do you keep up with changes?
Yeah, so the data, like I said a little bit ago, is based on customs declaration, and when we receive it directly from each customs department or statistical agency. And so I do know there's a couple of sources that are public online, but we also just proud ourselves in building relationships with each of these sources, and how we contract with each country looks a little bit different depending on the source. So for example, we get daily revisions for US trade data that's not available on the regular public site. So those are a little bit easier, but there's still trade data out there that's a little bit easier. But then we also just got a contract with the Laos government to teach them how to build their trade statistics, and now we have them as the trade statistics. But to your point of how do you keep up with changes, a lot of people may know about HS codes here, but I'll just give a little brief explanation here. So every time a good is being imported or exported, of course, it has an HS code. Our system goes up to the tariff line level, but the World Customs Organization makes updates every 5 years to HS codes. So the last was in 2022. And so TDM collects these lists and correlation tables of, okay, if it was last updated in 2017 or 2022, what are the new codes? What are deleted codes? Are there description changes? Things like that is something that we take account for. And even in our web portal itself, we have a color coding system to help people realize that automatically, but we also just have documents and PDFs for those explanations. And then anything up to the 8 to 12 digit level, which is also called the national level, tariff line level, those kind of digits, those can technically change at any point. So those are definitely a little bit more challenging, but since we have this database, if there's a new code that gets randomly introduced by China Customs or something, it's automatically uploaded into our database. So that's the good thing, is that we're always going to be adding any new codes automatically. And also there's revised tariff schedules, so people can use those as documents as well. We ask our sources for any updated tariff schedules. And again, some are easier to get than others. So we try our best to chase after those and have those kind of under some help documents in our system.
You have the ability, if things change on a daily basis, your databases will be updated on a daily basis for whatever that is that's changing.
Yeah, and it's not very often that the HS codes change, really. But again, if there's any new code, and it's monthly trade data, but since we have so many countries, the database gets updated daily. So yeah, so if there's any new codes, and also we implement revisions as well to the data. And so any kind of updates to the data, we're going to catch immediately and process them.
Okay, good. Now, how does TDM ensure accuracy and consistency when cleaning or interpreting import and export data sets, for example?
Yeah, so we have a wonderful team of data analysts that process and analyze the data before uploading, of course. And so there are certain IMTS UN standards that have to be met with trade data. So we ensure those standards and analyze for obvious no-goes. And one example is our team is even better than me, but I was sent some country data a few months ago, and I just took a look at it, and it was very obvious because there were multiple HS chapters missing, and we, don't publish partial data. If we publish data, it's going to be good quality, and it's going to give you all the codes, not just a select few. So looking at the data, there's multiple HS chapters missing. If you're looking at the trend line for HS for each code, I took a look at a couple of them, and they're a bit chaotic. There is up one month and then very much down the next. And so that was a pretty good sign, pretty obvious sign that it wasn't the best quality. However, the team also checks to make sure, of course, all of the needed parameters and fields that we offer at TDM are available too. And so if there are a couple of codes that, like I said, we revise our data, so there might be one or a few codes that have issues, but we're not going to withhold the entire data set. So we do make sure that clients know about that, and then also sometimes clients themselves that are very particular, like they're a dairy exporter, for example, and so they're going to notice immediately also if Netherlands releases their data and something looks off. So what we do when that happens for these smaller specific data points is that we go back to our source, we let them know about the data, and then we implement the revisions that they send back to us. So if you take a look at our track record on our web portal, you'll see that we're constantly revising and making sure that the data is up to date daily.
So if something does get changed, or when it gets changed, do the people that are subscribed to that particular data set get notified then?
They can. We have a system in place where they can get notified.
Okay, very cool. So how have you seen the demand for trade data change over the past few years? And if in fact it has changed, how has it changed?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say it's definitely the demand grew, but in different spaces and different reasons, depending on the person. I mean, even I gave an example, we work with some hedge funds. We're kind of called like an alternative data set for them. this was not a big market for us 5 years ago, or 5 years ago it started. We got our first hedge fund client, so that became, I think, people that weren't directly looking at trade data started thinking outside the box. And this isn't even just that industry, but other industries. They started thinking about, okay, how can we put this as a variable in our models? And again, it could be a clothing company, it could be hedge fund, it could be a different client that you don't really typically think of when you think of trade. So I think just that demand has grown, and also just in general, for example, if you think a couple of decades back, it was amazing to just have US trade data, and it was amazing then to have the data on CD-ROMs during the .com era. So look at where we are now with this huge database, and now people are pulling the data with Python and other programming languages like that too. So, and then I have to mention that, of course, that trade becomes a hot topic when the word tariff starts getting thrown around. So all of a sudden, my friends and family are asking me about trade where it wasn't before. But I'll try to stick away from the tariff talk. But I think the expectations for trade data has grown over the years, and so has demand. If, like I said, there's these different industries building forecasting models with the data. So now they're being able to predict their markets better or help their company's export strategy. And there's just been, in general, a larger demand for data. I think maybe you or someone else said it was like the next gold mine, basically. So the more data people can get, the better. And so we've seen a lot of that. And then, of course, the different kinds of trade data. So critical minerals is a big thing right now. So a lot of people are interested in particular in certain trade flows that aren't as readily available, like African trade data. And we're working on building up the Southeast Asia trade data. And so it depends on the industry and what's growing, but that's just one example.
Okay, that's amazing. So as things are changing these days, how are you balancing the demand for traditional statistical reporting with new client expectations for real-time or predictive insights?
Yeah, sure. I can split this question up into two parts. So I'll start with the one for the real-time data, and then another talk about the predictive insights on part two. So for the first one on real-time data, there are triumphs and drawbacks, I would say, just like any data set. And it's really important to always think about those kind of things. So I would say traditional statistical reporting, which is a little bit more like ours, I would say, provides data users with its official data that's been, overseen by the government. And there's some kind of designated person or office that reviews the statistical data they receive. And so, this means, like with our data, that you can revise the data to be the most accurate. And I think it depends on the data set. I don't know every single data set out there, but with real-time data, it doesn't always include, at least when it comes to trade data, doesn't always include all modes of transport. For example, it may leave out that something's being stored away in like a free trade zone or a warehouse if it's not the official trade statistics, and it may not have the level of granularity that is needed for a description of a product. A data set might not contain 100% of that country's trade flows, and that's something we try to do, like make sure it has 100% of all trade flows for that country. So I think it comes down to the data quality and the methodology behind each data set. And then with the predictive insights, a lot of our clients, like I mentioned previously, like to build these models themselves with our data as a variable. So it allows them to have confidence in what is being contained exactly in their model, how they want to adjust these variables. So if you're balancing certain variables, maybe with weather data, if you're a wheat trader or something like that, you're exporting wheat, and you might want to balance that in ways that weather data more than trade data or vice versa. And so knowing and having that confidence with the predictive insights, I think, is always a good thing to have. And I'll also add that PDM doesn't currently publish any forecasting models or predictive models, if you will. And that's just because we cover every single physical good and, 99% global trade flow. So theoretically, we could build, a linear regression model, for example, but it's usually our clients are the ones that have an extensive agricultural background, for example, and so they would like to know better on combining their data sets and, like I said, seeing which one outweighs others, and combining real-time data and our data and weather data, geospatial data, all these kind of things that you could put into a model is very important to them, and then they can have the confidence and how they proceed forward with that. So that's a couple of things I would say on the predictive modeling and the real-time data.
That's interesting. Do you guys cover all countries in the world, or is it segmented differently?
So we have 135 monthly reporting countries, and monthly is the most current for official trade statistics to come out. But like I said, since there's so many countries and they all have a different publication schedule, we do publish that data daily. So we're at 135 roughly. It's 99% of global trade flows, and what you can do for some countries that don't publish trade data as readily available is in trade data, we have the concept of derived trade or mirror trade. You might see that in some places. And it's basically being able to get an estimate on that certain country. So I think Libya is not a country we have, for example. And so what people do is get an estimate and do global imports from Libya to have like a Libya export derived estimate to see what's going on in their economy. So it's kind of cool because you can still kind of back end it and try to figure out what's going on even with the countries that don't publish data. And there are some methodology differences between import and export data, and there are differences with that, but it's always good to have official data that's good, but that's always a nice workaround to see what's going on in that country.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, so what kind of tools do most of your clients use in conjunction with trade data monitor data?
Yeah, I think just, this might be actually a pretty quick question, but clients tend to use bill of lading in conjunction with our data. So they are two different trade data sets that people don't typically realize, but we've also seen people use logistics data, production data, macro data sets, and then also nowadays people are also taking qualitative, looking at news sources and things like that. So there's a lot of different data sets, and maybe even some that I don't even think of. But I would say those are a couple of different data sets that people use in conjunction with ours. And then tools themselves, like I said, I mentioned a lot of programming languages recently. And then, of course, the regular kind of Microsoft Excel, Tableau, Power BI, because visualizations are really big right now. So I would say those are a couple of data sets and tools that clients use with our data.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, what skills or knowledge do you think are most critical for someone working in the import-export data and working in import-export data analytics? And what's your approach to educating clients on the importance and the limitations of trade data?
Yeah, and that second part is one of my favorite things about what I like about the job itself. But first, I recommend this to everyone I come across in trade. But there's a wonderful course that was actually in my bio that you mentioned. But it's a free course, the International Merchandise Trade Statistics course, hosted by the UN and WTO, and that goes through it kind of verified a lot of things I learned on the job, and then kind of challenged me to think outside of just data as well. But I would definitely recommend the International Merchandise Trade Statistics course. They have one on, yes, merchandise goods. I think they also have one on services data now. I have not personally taken it, but I'm sure it's just as good if people are interested in the services data. And then another course I would suggest is the Washington International Trade Association. They have a intensive trade seminar every year, and that one's really good. But in general, that's good for educating clients, but on a kind of general knowledge, of course, people taking any kind of international trade or international economics, supply chain classes, policies, important when you're thinking in conjunction with trade data. And so from things like trade negotiations in DC to world events like seeing the impact of COVID-19 at the ports, it's helpful to have some of the background on these events in your pocket and a basic understanding of how trade flows kind of work that may adjust, your models and what you're looking at. And then my approach to kind of educating clients on the importance and limitations of the trade data. So I always encourage those first couple of courses, but I always ask people specific examples that they're working through where they can tell me. And I have noticed that just going in person to different meetings is a lot. I get a lot more questions, and it's a lot more of a Q&A. So I've learned that if there's like a new client, for example, you have a quick training on TDM and trade statistics and things like that. And then later on, people start digging into the data. So then they start having more Q&A sessions because each country does publish a little bit differently. And so Saudi Arabia data is a little bit different than US data, which is a little bit different from EU data. So it can vary. And so we have some help guides and things like that to help clients, but I think it's the best just having a Q&A session with someone at TDM and going through very specific questions and limitations of that specific data set or specific country that they're using, for example.
Okay. Now, in your bio, we talked about that you've trained more than 90 overseas officials for the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the Department of State. Does this apply to them, or is there something different that you do when you're training people in official positions, like state positions?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to kind of customization of that industry or client. So one example is with USDA, all their embassies around the world. And they all have, different jobs at each of those embassies, but they also have a common goal and have a specific report that they publish that contains trade data every month. And so one thing at TDM is just that we customize a lot of reports for people. So if you want trade data to come out in a very specific format every single month, then instead of someone having to build that themselves, we kind of streamline that. And so when working with these different kind of clients, some of those country methodologies and things like that are the same that I always like to mention. But as you're working with different clients, like if anything, they teach me a lot about different industries, and it's great because I will tell you, one day I'm learning about Argentina droughts in wheat trade, and then the next I'm learning about critical minerals and China's processing capabilities, and you never know what you're going to get in the day in the job. But for example, at the USDA, I had to learn about something called their BECO groups and how they publish bulk, intermediate, and consumer-oriented type of goods. I learned that they like to use certain like crop years or marketing years, and then that can vary depending on the country and things like that. So it's not too different, but I kind of learn what they need, and then we kind of bounce off of each other in that way. But overall, if someone's looking at Saudi Arabia data, for example, they suppressed their crude oil exports. And so I give them workarounds on that, but of course, USDA wouldn't be as much looking into Saudi crude oil. So that's a couple of answers for you.
Got it. Thank you. So what is one piece of
Mhm.
advice that you would give anybody working with import-export data?
Yeah, so again, one of my favorite questions is asking yourself, anyone that's working with the data, ask yourself, do I know everything about this data set? And it doesn't even have to be just import-export data, right? But ask yourself, do I know everything about this data set? How is it collected? What are the nuances? What are the limitations? How should I best use it? Should I find an expert to tell me more about this? And so I just question everything that you're looking at, because now that we're in this stage of everyone getting data, through API, so they're using their programming languages. They might be using AI now without getting too much into it, but a lot of people just take the data as it is what I've seen. And there's so many different methodologies and qualitative differences about each of these data sets that people just don't really think about, and they'll just look at it and just say, oh, that looks odd, but they'll carry about their day instead of asking someone about it. So my piece of advice is just to, actually think about what's behind the data and like what's the methodologies, and be curious about it and not just take the data as it is. And I can give an example. So there are multiple trade rules for the EU. And so some clients may look at France in our data set and see France imports from cocoa beans from Netherlands. And people may be very confused about that because import data is country of origin usually, and Netherlands aren't really known for their cocoa beans. And so they didn't originate there. And so for most countries, they report as country of origin, but Eurostat, for the intra-EU trade, they report country of dispatch, so just wherever it clears customs in the EU for the first time. So if something looks odd in the data and it doesn't quite make sense, I would always encourage people to ask questions and or like ask, again, whatever data set you're working with, ask your representative or an expert in that field and see if anyone knows on why that might be. So that would be my piece of advice.
And that makes really good sense. Couple of forums ago, I was talking with Gunjan Bagla regarding India, and we were talking
Mm-hmm.
about numbers, imports versus exports. But you also have to look at per
Mm-hmm.
capita and other things that, numbers aren't just numbers, they're numbers in comparison. They're used for comparison as opposed
Yeah.
to just, flat numbers. And you have to look at what they're trying to tell you if you're asking the right questions about them, basically.
Yeah, and sometimes we even get questions, is people trying to compare two different data sets, and they're not always going to be a like for like. So production data doesn't mean it's going to equal export data necessarily, because some might be domestically being consumed. There might be other factors to it. It's a completely different collection method than import export. So we see that sometimes too. It's just like trying to compare like for like data sets that are not like for like, for example. So yeah, just going off of what you were mentioning too.
Yeah, perfect. Can you walk us through one or two specific cases so we can see how your clients use the data? You sort of touched on it, but if there's like one succinct example that would kind of take us from point A to point Z.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of interesting examples, but since I mentioned cocoa beans, why don't we go ahead and do some examples with chocolate tray data? So,
Chocolate.
yeah, chocolate. Let's go for it. Maybe next time I'll do wine, but depending on where you are in the world. But yeah, so there's a couple of different clients. They'll use the data in different ways. Let's say there's a corporation that produces chocolate. They might use the data, might be interested in looking at what countries are like emerging opportunities to entry, or maybe some countries where they might want to hold back. Their procurement section within that corporation might also want to look at kind of the unit value prices between different countries and see if they can get their cocoa beans for cheaper from Ghana versus Ivory Coast, for example, or something like that, and see if there are other suppliers that they might want to check out within other regions. And it is a little bit more macro focused on that, but we have had people use it for that. And then another user that might be looking into cocoa might be a trader. And so this trader might be interested in using the trade data, again, in their forecasting model. So they'll combine other news outlets that they see, weather data, to see how those supply and demand kind of factors shift. And they could also be looking at that unit value to look at price forecasting and futures. So that's another example. And then there are other more interesting, just in general examples, like researching into how tariffs or sanctions are implying different trade flows, or if there's, different ports that are blocked up for a couple of days, Panama Canal, being blocked or anything like that is obviously going to cause disruption. But even forced labor, if you're seeing any cotton exports out of the Uruguay region in China, for example, you can try to track that, or transshipment's a big thing in trade right now. So seeing if it's just passing through maybe one of those big transshipment points like Hong Kong or Singapore or so forth. So those are a couple of other ones without being specific with chocolate, but those are a couple of other things too that people have been looking at.
Okay, good. So it's just a broad range of uses for the data, which is amazing. So how has your understanding of global supply chains evolved since you started working at TDM almost 7 years ago?
Yeah, the funny thing, it goes back to my least favorite thing about the job, is the more I know about trade data, the more unanswered questions I feel like I have, the more I dig into it. And so, for example, we work with a lot of different clients, and so we've had it where I've known a trade economist who has studied trade for 20 years, and we do a quick Q&A session, and they end up discovering something new that they never knew previously. And it's because the world is constantly changing around us. So the trade data may change, how we see it 7 years ago to today. For example, people might start getting a little bit smarter with how they choose to release their trade data. 7 years ago, I didn't know that Australia suppressed sugar trade, but maybe someone in sugar probably knows that, but I didn't know that. And so countries can suppress, their data and do things like that. And so we'll find out more and more. I was looking into low value trade shipments for the US, and even though there was a code for low value trade shipments, apparently it didn't actually accurately represent entirely low value trade shipments. So it's the more questions we end up having, the more I keep digging into it. But our clients, like I said, are really the ones who kind of challenge us and find something new almost every day. Some other examples are, some reporting countries break out US and Puerto Rico and others don't. You talked about India. So India reports country of consignment for their imports rather than country of origin for most countries. So as we're digging into the data more and more, and the countries themselves are allowed to evolve their trade statistics, they're allowed to do, what they would like. I think that's, just constantly evolving, like you said. And I think during, I'm a little younger. I think during COVID was one of the first times I realized how important our global supply chain partners were, especially as, work, home equipment imports started skyrocketing and things like that.
Yeah, no, those are interesting times. So last
Yeah.
question before we open it up. Where do you see the future of trade data intelligence going, and what role do you think that TDM will play in that?
Yeah, I see, of course, technological advancements and partnerships growing, our understanding of trade data itself, and hopefully even more I know I talked about suppression, but hopefully even more visibility than we have today. So we'll see how that goes. But for example, some countries, this is something I talk a lot about when a client is, wondering why we don't have a specific reporting country. And it's sometimes things you don't think about. So, some countries still don't have this customs process automated and may have one data entry person, typing in each of those customs documents instead of it being streamlined. So it's actually a good point that TDM is trying to help out with, is that our teams do visit custom departments. And I think I mentioned Laos earlier, but we also did this with Cambodia, I know. But we help guide them on like trade methodologies and collection methods. And sometimes we may even buy them equipment or anything like that. Like I said, every contract's a little bit different depending on that country we're working with, but we are hoping that, everything just gets built up. And I think that the more people learn and comprehend trade statistics, the more complicated trade policy may be, or if there are some loopholes, maybe some close and then another appears. I feel like that happens with a lot of things. So it's a cycle of more questions and more answers all the time, and then how TDM will help shape that future, hopefully helping countries, promote their exports more and more. But of course, I have to say, hopefully we build up TDM web interface and our database as well. We're always looking to add new countries, and we also get our kind of new features and new reports and things like that. We take our feedback directly from our clients, so I'm not kidding when I say I have a running Excel list of client ideas, who told me about it. And so, whenever we have time with the IT team, I'll sit down with them and some others and see like, okay, what can we add? What's easy? What's not? What are some other good ideas while working with clients? So hopefully also we can help others by improving our, capabilities, web interface, and data as well.
Awesome. Yeah, no, it's the ever deepening rabbit hole, which is great.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for all those amazing answers. I want to open it up to everybody right now for Q&A conversation. So feel free to take yourselves off of mute. If you have a question, either hit the raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen, or alternatively, you can do Alt-Y, which is the good old-fashioned way to raise your hand. And there we have it, Professor Ansis.
Thank you,
Do
Anita.
tell.
Thank you so much, Jade, for being here today. You've accumulated an incredible amount of information and experience. Today is interesting that you're mentioning AI, because today most people think I go to AI, ask some question, get data, right? Well, the data can be very misleading. It is interesting you mentioned sugar at one time, but for example, also in the field of oil. We have a client back in Los Angeles that does low density polyurethane bags for the agricultural business. So they need resins. Well, when you look at the data for oil, there's a tremendous amount of trade. But when you actually look at the actual trade, not the macro, but the micro, what you find out is that all oil, most oil in the world is on allocation. So trade data means nothing. Like sugar you mentioned. If today you look for sugar, you can't find it from Brazil because it's all allocated in the world. So there is a macro of data, and I'm sure there at TDM you provide this valuable information. But it's very important that clients be informed on the reality of the data today. So, but one of the major questions, direct question I have is, in the field of rare earths, Everybody knows that right now there's a scarcity. So do you get a lot of questions about those? Do you have a lot of solutions for that? How do you go by a client to say, I got magnets for refrigerator, I have a magnet for turbines, and I can't get rare earths to be able to manufacture my product, which is a real problem.
Yeah, and I hear about this a lot, just going to different conferences in DC. Rare earths, critical minerals are a huge thing that people are talking about. And even if some people have shifted their entire manufacturing or, whatever they're building to the US, but there's still some things that we can't process here, or China's the only one that has certain, processing capabilities. So that's something that we hear about often. So, I mean, our data is hopefully where they can, procure somewhere else and see how trade shifts are moving. So maybe they can procure from a different country, but, they're still going to be hit maybe with a tariff, and see what they can supply here, and then see what other countries might have something similar.
So should I refer our client directly to you, or should we do the inquiry on behalf of the client? How do you deal with that?
It depends on who wants to do more analysis with the data, I would say.
They do.
They do? You said?
Yeah. Is an engineering firm that serves gas turbines around the world, and without magnet, they have no business. And today they are about 6 months in late deliveries because of it. So they're really looking for new sources. I don't know if you are the right company, or maybe a brokerage company, maybe Anita can help you on that. But would your company provide that kind of service?
We would just provide the trade data and teach them other countries where to find it. So that's our minimum.
Okay. Thank you so much, Jade. Appreciate it.
Jade, along those lines, speaking about minerals and rare earth, do logistics companies tend to use TDM services? And if so, like for what?
I mean, somewhat, I would say. It's not our biggest market, surprisingly, but we do have different logistics companies that use it, but they're really just looking at it for, sometimes market access, but then also, for example, we had this client a couple of years ago. I guess there was some trucking strikes between US and Canada border. So really they were just trying to see what products were mostly going to be like what's crossing that border the most. So we have this Canada province and US state kind of trade data in our data set. So they were looking into that to see, okay, what products are going to be most impacted by these strikes. And of course, it depends on like how long that is too, because it's monthly trade data. But that's one example of how logistics companies are one that had a question for me that I was helping them out with.
Do people ever come to you for ideas on what new products they might want to import or export, or do they already need to have an idea and then you guide them?
It could be both. There's some people that just know what they're doing and they know their products, but others also just in general might not be familiar with HS codes. We have trade economists who know HS codes like the back of their hand. They use it as their PIN code for their phones. But like a 4-digit soybeans code, 1201. But then there's other people that don't know what an HS code is, and that's something, again, it's kind of included with.
I know what it is, but do you want to say what that acronym is for anybody who's listening now or may listen in the future?
Yeah, so the harmonized schedule codes or harmonized tariff schedule codes are on customs declaration forms. It's how you're tracking import and export data. And so also there's a hierarchy, and the more digits you add to it, the more detailed that product description is. So like what's a good example? Like chapter 80, it'll start as a 2-digit code. So chapter 85, I think is like electrical something. And then 8541 is one of the semiconductor codes. And then you break it out at the 6-digit level, and then you're like 8541 something something that gets into like memories of the semiconductors and all the different parts. And the 2, 4, and 6-digit codes, those are harmonized, or you know what, I should do dairy because that's an easier example to follow. 04 is dairy, for example. 0406 is cheese. 0406 30 or something, I think it's processed cheese or blue vein cheese. So you get very detailed, and up to the 6-digit level, it is harmonized across all countries internationally. Anything above that 6-digit level is going to be country specific. So EU has 8-digit codes, Turkey has 12-digit codes, and it's not harmonized, but it also has the most detail, and it is also the level that tariffs are typically implemented at.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so we're at 12:55, so we're going to wrap up. Jade, thank you so much for sharing the information. This is a rabbit hole I could go down. We could have like a 3-hour conversation. I still would not be bored because I happen to be like a data nerd, so it's my kind of thing too. But anyways, I really appreciate your time and for joining us. To everybody who is still on the call or who may see it in the future, if you enjoyed today's Export-Import Forum, join us for our next one. It's always on the 4th Thursday of the month, which is not the same thing as the last Thursday of the month, because there's a couple of months out of the year where there is a 5th Thursday. So keep an eye out for it. You can always visit the globalchamber.org website and see when that is. While you're there, check out other Global Chamber events because we have lots of things going on. You never need to be bored, or you can't sleep at 2 a.m. California time. Chances are there's a Globinar going on in Barcelona or Madrid or in Asia or something else along those lines. So you can always find somebody to talk to and to connect with. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you on the next one. Remember, it is great to be global. And thank you for those balloons, Professor. Those are cute. I have to figure out how to do that. Okay, don't forget to save the chat, and we'll see you in 4 weeks. Thanks so much.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Jade. Thanks,
It was a
Anita.
great conversation. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank
Very
you.
informative. Thank you.
Bye-bye.